then. So, morning everyone. Thank you for joining us during your half term. We hope you are feeling refreshed and have caught up on yourselves. Angie and I are using this opportunity really just to join up some dots and some different conversations we've had about the diversity, equity and inclusion leadership programme that we have written. And we currently have five cohorts going through it, and there's opportunities to join our future cohorts. So, Angie, would you like to introduce yourself to everybody?
Hi everyone, nice to see you all this half term. I'm Angie Brown and I am a former school leader. So my background is in English education, started out 20 years ago as an English educator and I'm working in inner city schools. And then I started working with young people who found it difficult to kind of be in mainstream education. So specialised a little bit in special and working with children in the pupil referral service. I would say that my interest in diversity, equity and inclusion though started well before I became an educator, because obviously as a Black person growing up in a rural, mainly white environment, I had a lot of opportunity to feel the intersection of what it's like to be Black in white environments, and in particular in the education system. So when I went into working in schools and working in the inner city, I kind of took that lived experience and began to think about how we could more effectively create learning environments that supported all young people, regardless of their background or inclusive of their background. And there are a few defining moments, I would say. There's working with children who felt marginalised. There's also being a school leader who was often called upon to do things to work with Black parents specifically. There's also moments where, as a head teacher, it was quite obvious that as the only Black person in the room, I had to prove myself differently to others. And I also had to defend myself in ways that I'm still kind of processing. And so this passion for diversity, equity and inclusion work was lit because of my experience, but also because I felt that I was placed at the right moment at the right time to actually impact on the lives of other people. And so I continued to work with children and then have kind of turned that passion for DEI work into the work that I do with adults. Increasingly, as a head teacher, I began to move into coaching spheres. And so I started working in my last 4 years in the education system with women who were interested in breaking through the glass ceiling and making promotion. So I was able to access the funding actually through Hannah, the DFE funding that supported people from marginalised backgrounds accessing and moving through into leadership. So I worked on some women into leadership programmes and then on some BAME leadership programmes. And I've continued to coach in that space, to coach women who are interested in moving forward into school leadership, and also to coach BAME colleagues who are interested in working with me because I recognise some of the challenges, but also because there are some sort of systemic discussions, some discussions about systemic oppression that are usefully framed within that coaching relationship. And Hannah and I have known each other for a few years now. We met in grassroots circles and we have been discussing a way in which we could bring our interests, our passions, our knowledge also of running schools together in the DEI space and thinking about things that we could do. Both of us are kind of really into practical action. So this DEI leaders course felt like a natural synergy of our relationship. And I'm thoroughly enjoying that, but also kind of working outside of this space with schools and with leaders in other ways, but in the field of diversity, equity and inclusion. And just one more thing I forgot I should add the other day, Hannah, is that I'm also really turning this lens inward. So as much as I'm interested in looking at the system change that we can affect, I'm doing a PhD at the moment and really looking at the impact that working in a system that has marginalised me has had on me. So I'm doing a PhD kind of on me at the moment, but also on this massive area of how we can increase opportunity for people from diverse backgrounds, but also the kind of confidence and the skill of all professionals working in education to ensure that our school environments are really safe for everybody that goes, that attends them. Hannah.
Thanks, Ange. So as Angie said, we met 5 years ago. So it was pretty much around the same time as when I co-founded Women Ed. And the reason why I was one of the co-founders of Women Ed was I was working in one of the biggest MATs in South London, and there was very much a patriarchal structure going on. I could see some nods from people I used to work with on the call. So I mean, I was one of the only women on 2 SLTs, but they were all white SLTs as well. So during that time, I went to work at the teaching school. It's when the equality diversity grants were being sort of tendered for, and I pitched this map that served communities that are very diverse. Our schools had 55% minimum BAME children, 37 languages being spoken, but were being led by solely white SLTs for the majority of those schools. And I pitched for us to do the work. I pitched for us to run the programme. So we ended up with one of the biggest BAME leadership programmes in the country. We had 90 people. And I think one of the defining moments for me at the launch was sitting in a room in Crystal Palace at a school that was highly diverse with 90 people of colour who were middle to senior leaders, and the energy that created in that school was quite off the scale. Every child of colour in that school gravitated to a window or door in that launch and asked where I had found all of these people of colour, because I'd never seen so many leaders that looked like them before. And I think as a white person, that made me realise the work we all need to do. I then took on a headship and moved out of London, and my bubble got burst when I realised that moving to South Oxfordshire, the work that I was used to us doing in London wasn't happening where I was. And some of you might know I had a bit of a spat with the Daily Mail and ended up in the Daily Mail because, God forbid, we had a halal kitchen, and there was quite a lot of ignorance around what that meant to be a Muslim and a halal sort of catering service. So around that time, Angie and I were talking a lot about the lack of intersectionality in the grassroots. I was working with Benny, who many of you have probably read her book now, and we were talking about the fact that we need a joined up conversation. And that's where Diverse Ed came from. We created a coherent, cohesive space to join up the dots, to join up the communities, to look at an intersectional, connected approach to this work. And as Angie said about what the journey she's on internally, I have done a lot of checking my own privilege, a lot of introspection about have I been part of the problem throughout my career on some of the situations I found myself in. And having friends like Angie and Benny, I can't really hide from some of those conversations sometimes as well. Like we're critical friends. We talk deeply about these things. And when I then left Headship and Diverse Educators has got its website, and with everything that kicked off last summer, and with the response from the system and the knee-jerk response from a lot of schools, that's when Angie and I said, we need to do something about this. We've done this work, we've led this work, we know we can support people leading this work, but we don't want our schools asking people to step up and lead this work without support, without peer support, without a kind of a programme to support them on that journey. Hence why we are here today to talk about the programme that we have co-written and that we co-facilitate.
Okay, so we would quite like you to be involved in the session, not just passively listening to us. So I think the place that we start with this programme, and certainly Hannah and I both English teachers, so the lens that we tend to use is narrative, is what's your story, what are the stories of other people in our spaces, in our communities. And I think it's a powerful place for all of us to start, because it is the place at which we can meet each other as human beings. So we just want you to make some notes at the beginning of this session. What's your why? I'm interested particularly in why you're committed to this work. Why are you committed to diversity, equity and inclusion work? And if you could start with a sentence about why you're committed to diversity, equity and inclusion work. I might call on some people in a moment. I might do some cold calling, so, just be prepared to be picked on. Underneath that personal commitment, your why, if you could just write a little about your context, and then what falls out of that is therefore your diversity, equity and inclusion vision for your context. What would it be like if it was, as I like to always use the term luminary, what would it look like if it was great? And then finally, if you can answer the question again, just in your own notebook, what is your current DEI provision? And I'm not going to put anyone on the spot and ask them to answer that question about their current provision, but that is a moment for you to be really, really honest with yourselves about what's going on in your setting. And the honesty is key, and it's pretty much central to the programme that Hannah and I are running. We're interested in creating a space in which people can say, I really feel this way about diversity, equity and inclusion. And for example, I work in a context in which people say the right things, but they're not necessarily doing the right things. And for example, the vision for me, if it were brilliant, would be X, Y, and Z. Yet at the moment, our current provision looks like this. And we want that space and we want that level of honesty because we want to work with you over time. This isn't about doing a programme for a few weeks and then having it all sorted. This is about setting a roadmap for something that could really, really change the organisation that you work in. So if you could answer those 4 questions with that in mind, that would be great. Okay, so I'm just going to ask a couple of people about why they're committed to this work. And Dominique, can I pick on you just because I can see you and you have a nice alliterative name?
Sure. I came back to the UK a couple of years ago after teaching internationally for 15 years. And I think I was in a bubble whilst teaching internationally. And I could see things happening, but because I was quite sort of protected myself in a way as an expat, I wasn't so affected, but I knew things were still affecting me and others around me. When I came back to the UK, I could really see that work needs to be done, in especially my current school. And so why I'm personally committed is because I've been affected. There have been opportunities which I think have passed me by because of what I look like. And also because of a lot of unconscious bias that I see. I think that's the sort of main driving force for the reason why I'm doing this, and to try and get people to talk about this, not just people of colour, but also leadership within schools, leadership within organisations, international educational organisations, and recruitment agencies as well. And that's sort of some of the work I've been trying to do in the last 6 months, trying to sort of connect those dots and connect with people. Do you want to answer the other questions as well?
No, that's fine. Just that why. That's really, really, really helpful. And thank you for sharing. And it's not always easy to share some of the things, especially as a person of colour, in a large forum. So I really appreciate you talking about that. And I think that why for many of us comes from this has affected me and this is why I do the work. And for others it will be different. But I really appreciate you bringing that viewpoint. Can I ask Sarah Horton, because I can see you and I know you and I know that you work for an organisation other than education specifically. What's your why, Sarah?
It sounds, I suppose, a little bit grand, and I'm just going to say the context that I come from also, because I think that's relevant. That I work in mental health in school, like with adults who work with children, and I oversee programmes related to mental health. And I don't think you can separate this subject from mental health. And what you said about doing your PhD and looking internally, I think that's important for all of us. And I suppose in a very grand way, our world doesn't improve unless we do this work, and we're in a bit of a mess at the moment. And I realistically, I think probably not in my lifetime, but I want to be part of planting the seeds. So
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for bringing that neatly, as if we planned it, other dimension, which is kind of the reason that we're of course doing this, is because there's a huge social motivation that things are a mess, that we, you know, the events of last summer, or the reason that Hannah and I ended up having a conversation while Hannah was in between meetings and I was parked in a car park in between childcare things, and thinking, what can we do? Because there are thousands of people who want to come out and they want to do something, and there isn't anything that's really addressing practically what we can do, not just in the short term, not just let's quickly change this bit of our curriculum, but practically to actually enact social change. And so a dimension of our program is about that, you know, there's a social change necessity, but there's also the law. There's also just there's a legal framework, and why are we not talking about it, and why are we not all acting in accordance with it? So thanks very much, Sarah, for bringing that dimension. And shouldn't all of our ambitions be grand? Shouldn't they all be? My idea is the utopia is that our children grow up in somewhere that's really like not just okay, but visionary, luminary, that's magnificent and has all of their well-being, their mental health, their general health at heart. I really appreciate that. I could go on forever, but I better move on.
Thank you, Angie. So, we've got some we believe statements we want to share with you, because I think it's important for people to know where we're coming from doing this work. And we position ourselves as being critical friends. We're both coaching trained. We've both been school leaders. We haven't got all the answers. We're not going to sign you up for a programme and say, here's your curriculum, here's your to-do list, here's your tools. It is about working with people to bespoke and personalise the work we're doing for the context and the role you're in, and to support you in doing that challenge. So one of the frames we use is that we need to do the inner work in order to do the outer work. And what we saw last summer was a lot of schools getting very noisy about doing the outer work, lots of very sort of like grand commitments, but we know that some of those leaders weren't on the journey to actually understand their involvement in these situations. So we've got strong beliefs around diversity, equity, inclusion, and it is that cultural commitment. It is grounded work. It is about being strategic. So we are not going to put a sticking plaster on the problems that we know we've got in the school system and in society. This is about a 3 to 5 year plan. This is about the work we're going to do this academic year, next academic year. What's it going to look like in 3 years, 5 years' time? And ultimately, so that we can create those safe schools that are safe physically, but also psychologically. Because we know that there's a lot of schools that it's not psychologically safe to be out. It's not psychologically safe to talk about racism. So thinking about how we can create these inclusive school communities for the benefit of all of those stakeholder groups. And one of the things we talk a lot about is how to be an inclusive ally and how to get comfortable with those uncomfortable conversations. So that's part of the lens through which we do this work. So why is this programme needed? Okay, we want to help establish, embed and sustain a strategy within schools, across the system. We want to take those grand plans, the vision, and turn it into commitment and action and actually grounded provision. There's a lot of talk. We need to be doing the walk, and we need to be taking people on that journey with us. And we believe that this work needs to be remunerated, because we don't have Senkos in our school who aren't qualified and aren't paid. We don't have DSLs in our school who aren't qualified, who aren't paid. Why are schools asking people to take on EDI or DEI with no time, no resource, no support and no money? That is not on, particularly when they might be calling on the one person of colour on their SLT or in their school. We got contacted by so many people during the summer who in some ways felt recognised, seen to be asked to do this work, but on the other hand felt completely vulnerable and isolated that they're being asked to do this work because of their protected characteristics. And I think that's problematic in itself. So that's part of the reason why we're doing this work, is to make a lot of noise and to position in the system that this role needs to have a job description, a personal specification, it needs to be interviewed, there needs to be CPD that goes with it, and a support network that goes with it as well. So how's the programme delivered? It is a wholly virtual delivery. And the beauty of this programme is that we have got people from early years, primary, secondary, FE, state, academy, international, independent. Our cohorts are truly diverse. They are much more female heavy than we'd like them to be at the moment. We'd like to have more gender representation, but the sessions are interactive. They are monthly, and there are some intersessional activities to do in between, things to read, things to do, conversations to go and have. As explained, we both come at this from being head teachers who have done this work, but through very different lived experiences. We're both English teachers. We're both brought up in Devon. We didn't know each other when we were being brought up in Devon, but navigating those white spaces, but then thinking about the cities we've worked in and then the rural environments we've worked in as well. And we also want to straddle the grassroots and the system. So for 5 years, I've done stuff in the evenings, on the weekends. People haven't been paid to do that work. The people who care come on a Saturday. We need the system to care for this work to happen during the school day and for people to be released to come and do the training during their job. And then the group coaching environment is about that peer support, that peer criticality, creating that network of support around you. And we're putting together an ongoing reading list and also a glossary of key terms to empower the individuals to go away and empower their school communities to be grounded in the concepts, the language, the kind of the literature that supports the learning process. We do get asked this question quite a lot, and it's quite a hard question to ask, like, who is the target audience? Depending on the school you work in, the context you're in, and the hierarchy of that school, we've got CEOs doing the programme, we've got head teachers, we've got directors of education, we've also got heads of year and heads of department. For me, it's about the right person with the right commitment, and we talk a lot about sphere of influence. So I think it's thinking about how you're going to build that team around you. What we don't want is people doing this work in isolation, and some of our current delegates are feeling quite overwhelmed by the amount of work they want to take on. And we're talking about how can you engage other stakeholders. We've mentioned already that we want every school to designate someone to actually do this role and for this work to be recognised. So target audience wise, it is an inclusive cohort. If you feel like this is the right work for you to be doing and you've got the support of your organisation, that's all we need really from a target audience point of view.
So we get asked quite a lot, what happens if we're not doing enough? What happens if we're not in the right place? What, will we be judged? Is it a safe space? And we've tried to create a programme, and I think we've been very successful at creating a programme which has a really non-judgmental and practical approach to this work. One of the things that I navigate as a Black woman who works in the space with anti-racism is that people often assume that there is going to be a level of judgment that I'm going to bring to the work, because effectively what I'm saying is, tell me all the ways in which your organisation is institutionally racist, and then saying, okay, how can we make it better? And that's a really vulnerable position to be in for me, and it's a really vulnerable position to be in for the organisation. But I would rather have that conversation, and Hannah and I would rather have a programme where that conversation can happen, than have people pretend that everything's okay or look for ways of papering over the cracks. So we have deliberately set out to say, this is a warts and all, this is non-judgmental, we meet you where you are in order that we can get you to where you want to be. And the way we do that is in the kind of quite careful organisation of this programme. So as Hannah said, last summer, people mainly got in touch to say, how can we diversify our curriculum? How can we decolonise our curriculum in response to the murder of George Floyd and the massive sudden focus and uprising of interest in anti-racist work? For those of us who've been doing anti-racist work because we were people of colour by virtue of being alive for our whole lives, it was a bit like, okay, this work has been happening. For those of us who've been doing diversity, equity and inclusion work for our entire professional careers, of course, there was this work has been happening. But for lots of organisations, it had kind of been put on the back burner. And what we did when we looked at the programme design was we thought about where the kind of common ground is. What's the baseline? Well, the baseline is in session 1, where we look at this political case. There is a legal framework for diversity, equity and inclusion work that is not about, I'm really moved by this current social plight, I'm really moved by this situation out there in the world and I want to suddenly act. It is, no, there's a legal framework for the work and we should all be doing this. We have a public sector equality duty and this is where we start. So we start there and we look at some case law and we look at the influence of cases like, for example, the murder of Stephen Lawrence, the Macpherson report. And we use that as the kind of justification for all of those people who are thinking, how do I get my organisation to shift? We start there because that's the kind of legal duty. Moving into session 2, we start to think about your personal case, because as I said earlier, the work is about making what's out there something that really moves you in here. So why are you sitting here? Why have you given up your Friday after a moment of your Friday afternoon? Why would you want to spend 10 weeks on this? We begin to make the political case personal so that you have a means of articulating why your organisation needs to do this. And between session 2 and 3, you're going to start to gather that information and work out how is it that the people I'm surrounded with feel about this work? Where are they on that kind of on that spectrum of knowledge and awareness of what we should be doing in terms of diversity, equity and inclusion work, and what we're actually doing? How do they feel about this work? And we're going to give you some opportunity to think through the mechanisms for talking to people and getting their honest feedback about where they are in relation to this work. And session 3, so we call, in between session 2 and 3, we have had an audit, but we don't call it an audit anymore. We call it a series of conversations, because nobody likes audits. So we give you some opportunity to structure those conversations with staff. And in session 3, we start to look at unpacking that. What does it mean? Is there any is there distance between where I stand as a human being, where the organisation currently stands, and where the people I'm surrounded with who I need to influence and impact on stand? And that is as a preparation for session 4, which is about developing a training and support plan for staff that, again, you can position as a non-judgmental look at where people really are. So you're starting with, you're meeting your organisation where it is also. Because if this work is to have any impact or is to be sustainable, then we really can't have it that kind of, I'm sorry to do this, and if anybody on this call is a member of site staff, then I apologise, but in my experience with my own site staff, there was always this kind of, I remember starting in a job and people saying, oh well, you know, the site team were a bit, we'll find that a bit difficult, or they have these kinds of conversations with young people and, you know, we've had to pick them up on it a few times. That's no good. Your organisation needs to be, everybody is on the same page, and if they're not on the same page, then how are we having conversations with those people in order that we can hear what page they're on and we can move them toward what the organisational page is going to be. Session 5 is where, in the middle, where we start looking at the curriculum. So having done that, what's the legal framework? Where do I stand? What training can I have? You know, having overcome that, I'm just a bit nervous because I don't have the language, or I've always put my foot in it, that kind of thing that happens in staff teams. Having overcome that, we then look at why we would diversify our curriculum. And so this isn't a kind of an approach which is you forcing your organisation to do things it doesn't yet want to do. It's an approach which allows people to come to the conclusion that, of course, with that lens, with that slightly decolonised lens, we might want to do things differently in our classrooms as well. In session 6, we look at diversifying the curriculum itself, so we help you come up with a plan. And then in session 7, we move into your policies, your procedures, and the vision and values that support this work. So again, we haven't tinkered with those things at the beginning. We're trying to get there by virtue of working collaboratively with members of your staff, with taking people with you, so that you can start to look at, okay, so how does that actually manifest itself in terms of the way we work with community or with other stakeholders? How does that manifest itself in the organisation of our governors meetings or our parents evenings? What does it look like in terms of the behaviour policy? So it's taking the thinking that you've already that you've gifted yourself the time to have, and then applying it to policies and procedures. And then at the end, we look at a plan. And again, deliberately, this is you get 10 sessions with us. And so this isn't about saying, let's have a plan and let's get it all done in 10 weeks. This is actually about saying, right at the end, how does this look over the next 3 to 5 years? Because we're interested in you creating a sustainable plan that's manageable for your organisation in order to actually create change. So as I said, we have 10 sessions. We have a kind of open event at the beginning, a celebration event, and we find ways of you getting to know a mixed cohort of people, hopefully. So our cohorts at the moment are quite mixed, although we do have some cohorts that are discrete to particular regions. And then you get 8 half days, which are spread across the year. And at the end, we have a celebration of best practice session, and we're kind of evolving that as we go. And Hannah will talk to that in a minute. And in between, as I said, we have these intersessional tasks that we will ask you to engage in.
And as it's evolving and iterating, so our first cohort only started in September, so they've been very much instrumental to the kind of the evolution of the design and development of this programme, and we're being responsive to what they need. So the DEI glossary is a growing document, which each of them has now got their own version in their local context, which their schools staff can add to. Same with the reading list. We've been asked by lots of people, mainly through Twitter. We've got 150 DEI leaders who are doing the work, aren't getting paid for it, and want a bit of help, aren't doing the programme. So we are launching a DEI Leaders Network with a half-termly opportunity to come together and to get that peer connectivity if you're not doing the programme. We're also going to launch an annual summer conference. So on June the 30th, we're going to have a whole day where we're going to have external and internal speakers to the cohort, opportunity for some of the people who have done the journey this year to share the impact it's had in their context, because we've got very, very diverse schools within our first cohort. Also opportunities to reflect on what we've achieved. One of the things we really want to be doing is affirming the progress we are making. There's a very much a deficit mindset when it comes to DEI. We can critique everything that's wrong and everything that's not happening, but we do need to acknowledge and affirm and celebrate what we are doing. And it's about growing those green shoots and what have we achieved this year, what we're going to achieve next year. And then post the programme, we're not there yet, no one's actually graduated from the programme yet. Angie and I will then have an offer of ongoing DEI coaching, DEI consultancy as needed on particular projects that then might come up as future roadblocks. And we were just talking this morning in one of our planning meetings about how we're then going to begin to empower the graduates, the alumni from the programme, to come back and feed into the new cohorts, the strategy. So hopefully it'll become more cyclical and it will become more about peer support longer term. So I'm going to send you an email at the end of the session with some quick links in it. We've got a page now on the Diverse Educators website. You can go to the tab called Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Leadership, and there's a kind of a landing page there. There's details about those different parts of the offer. And we've got 3 cohorts that we're currently recruiting for. Cohort 3 is already half full. So in April, we're launching a Thursday morning series, a Thursday afternoon series, and then we've got a July cohort starting. We've got dates for September start, January start, but we're recruiting cohort by cohort. But I will send you an email afterwards with quick links for the different opportunities. And we thought it might be useful just to hear some feedback from some of the people who are currently doing the programme. So we did an interim impact evaluation questionnaire. I just want to take a few minutes to read some of the responses here. So this is Anna, who's a middle leader in a faith secondary school. And we very much supported her in navigating her sphere of influence as a middle leader, where there's quite a lot of structural and systemic barriers that she's trying to navigate from her sphere of influence. So that's an example of a middle leader. Oh, we then have Amy, who is an executive head and a system leader in a trust with a teaching school. They decided as a trust to put 2 people into cohort 1 because they didn't want one person to take the burden of this work alone. And they've enjoyed it so much. We've got 2 of their MAT HR team in cohort 2 because they're looking at the school-based strategy, but also the MAT-based strategy and kind of the people management side of things. And then our third pen portrait is Antonia, who is one of the only co-CEOs in the country. And she's carved out this space for herself to come to do the learning, to then shape the strategy across her trust in South East England. And I think Angie's words a minute ago were people gifting themselves the time to do the reflection. We know how frenetic the school system is. We know what a difficult year it is. We know how knee-jerk schools can be. So carving out a monthly opportunity to come together where we can ground people, because there's been moments of complete overwhelm in the world, in the school system, in the work, and we can create that really safe space and bolster and share and support to then go out and do the next month's work to come back and update us. That's very much the kind of the approach we are taking.
So with that in mind, we'd like you to think then, and I think Antonia's words are quite helpful there, because she feels like she's got in place a strategy, and again, you know, a 3 to 5 year strategy. Just be interested in your reflections on your organisation's diversity, equity and inclusion strategy. Where do you think you are at the moment? Would you say that it's something that's establishing? Are you making some inroads? Have you got an area of the work that you're doing that feels particularly well embedded? Have you started with a curriculum perhaps? Have you started thinking about anti-racist work? Or do you have a particular focus on the inclusion of disabled colleagues and disabled young people in your organisation? Would you say that the work is embedded? Would you say that there is some real strategic leadership, governance and trust level of diversity, equity and inclusion work? That there are others, not just interested individual parties in the hierarchy, but those who are right at the top of the organisational hierarchy who are committed to the work and are supporting others in moving it forward? Or would you say that the work is sustained, that you have a DEI strategy that you can really use to start to implement system change, and that you could be supporting other schools with? Whatever stage you're at, would be interested for you to make some notes about that, and also your next steps. And clearly we're interested in having as big a network as possible for this programme, but more importantly, we're really interested in organisations just doing this work however you do it. Come on this programme, come on the multitude of other programmes that there are out there, but please be thinking about these things, because what people have a tendency to do is to say, yeah, I mean, we're pretty good, people are quite happy, you know, I think DEI work's quite positive. And then they talk about one dimension of DEI work, the one thing that they think is going well. And not the 9 protected characteristics, but the one thing that they think that they're doing really well. And I want you to be thinking much more broadly about this work. This is how we change society, is that we don't get siloed into, yes, we did Black History Month. We think really broadly about the intersection of people's identities and their lives, and the opportunity to make a difference for every single one of those people across all of those intersections. So I'm going to call on somebody again before we, in fact, no, I'm not going to call anybody. I'm going to ask you to volunteer. That's a fairer way of doing this. Does anyone want to volunteer to tell us how their organisation's DEI strategy is going? Safe space, no judgment. Anyone?
I'm happy to
share something.
Oh,
2 people, great. Lucy and, was that Gersh? Did you?
Jenna.
No. Jenna, I can't see what's going on here. So, okay, Jenna, great. Jenna and Lucy, brilliant. Jenna, you go first.
So yeah, I would say we're definitely establishing, but well established. We have, we've been calling it EDI, working party made up of governors, SLT and some members of staff. And for us, it's very important that it's not just top heavy, that, like you were saying, it's a whole community. So we have got some training in place, and it's an expectation that all stakeholders attend, that, you know, anyone who's part of school is part of that. For us, curriculum is a big thing, but also recruitment. So trying to get my head around recruitment. For me, you know, going as a class teacher into SLT, recruitment has always been, school business manager has looked at that. So in terms of HR and I suppose legal advice, in terms of how you go about recruiting a bit more widely, but doing it fairly and not getting ourselves into any bother with how we recruit. And then also, premises, accessibility, how we promote EDI, to staff, children, parents, and wider community. So we have a roadmap in place, but I suspect, we'll veer off the path a bit as we go. The more I read, the more I realise I don't know. So I'm very much
it's great.
Admit that, and this really excites me, because I think hearing different people's voices and experiences and gaining knowledge, I think will be perfect for me and our community.
Great, thank you for sharing. And I love that you identify that the more you find out, the more you need to find out. And it's a moment where you go, oh, it's literally a bottomless pit. Okay, you just have to kind of breathe yourself through it, because it is,
completely.
it really is. And we can do hard things as well. And that's also okay. Lucy.
I work in an incredibly diverse school where, for the first time in my career, the staffing structure in the support and also teaching staff does represent the community that we serve, which for me is a real change. The senior leadership is much whiter than the rest of the staff body, and I think that's something that is a wider problem as a multi-academy situation, and kind of recognise some of the things that Hannah was talking about as well. But I think that the school thinks they're a lot more diverse than they are. And for instance, I've been challenging a lot as a new member of staff recently, because boys are only allowed to wear one earring, but girls can wear two. Why? Seriously, that wasn't even in place when I was at school in the 80s. Where does that come from? What is that? And not recognizing actually that aspects of jewelry wearing is culturally significant for some of our community groups, and actually they're being excluded in the uniform policy, haircut policies, things like that. So I think that they're starting to recognize that they have things to do. And recently they were talking about the head boy and the head girl. And I was like, why are you calling it head boy and head girl? Why not head student? Why? Well, Oxbridge candidates, they want to be recognised as head girl. No, we don't call firefighters firemen anymore, do we? We don't call police officers policemen and police women. We need a gender neutral term. And I think they're slowly recognising, but unfortunately, I think that for our setting and many others, I think that the massive issues that COVID has presented has slowed down a lot of this work, really slowed down a lot of this work.
Thank you, and thanks for raising that. And we're kind of bucking the trend in many ways, because we have cohorts with organisations that are doing, that are continuing, and they're finding it brilliantly nourishing and also really hard, because they're managing quite a lot. But what we really want is that at the end of this COVID situation is that people can say, wow, look back down the road we've just travelled and we've been moving this forward. But also what I really don't want is to find myself, and inevitably I will, in another world situation where another policeman brutalises another black person on the streets of somewhere, and everyone goes, oh yes, that agenda again. Because who needs it? Who needs to we know what the agenda is, we've known it forever, and we need to just continue the work like it's always happening, rather than pretend that was just a sort of mishap and now we can all revert back to normal. So thanks very much, Lucy, for raising that.